Okay, Tov. Today's daf is daf Ayin Vav, and we'll start with Tana Rabbanan on the third line down from the top of the Amud, and the Gemara is going to quote a Machlokas Tanoim in addition to what we saw before about the case of a person who gave a get al a Tanai al Menashe Tishamshi es Abba. Tana Rabbanan. Hareze Gitech al Menashe Tishamshi es Abba Shtei Shonim. So in this case, he specifies that she will serve his father for 2 years, or alternatively, al Menashe Taniki es b'ni shtei shonim. Again, he specifies 2 years. Is afal pishlon is kaima tanai hareze get lefi shelo omar lo. There was no tanai kafel here, and this is the Tanakama of the Brisa, Rabbi Meir, who holds that we derive from Bnei Gad Bnei Ruvain that you need a tanai kafel like Moshe Rabbeinu. When he made a Tanai with Bnei Gad Bnei Ruvain, he made it in both directions. That if you'll go forward and cross the Yarden, then because of your chalutzim, you will inherit the land of Gilead, and if you don't go, you will not inherit the land of Gilead. In this case, he didn't say the opposite. He only said, Hareze gitech al menashe tishamshi es Abba. He did not say it the other way around. V'im lo tishamshi, it will not be a get. Or, for example, he says im taniki yehe get, but he didn't add im lo taniki lo te get. So since it wasn't a Tanai kafel, there's a technicality and a flaw in the Tanai. The Tanai is therefore batel, and the mais is kayam, and therefore the get is chal. But again, not because she had fulfilled the Tanai. No. The get is chal because there is no Tanai. The Chacham disagree. They maintain that even though there's no Tanai, kafel, nevertheless, im niskayim Tanai, hareze get, lo niskayim Tanai lav, eno get. So Chacham will validate the Tanai, despite the fact that it's not a Tanai kafel. And it could be possible that even the Chacham agree that fundamentally we need a Tanai kafel, but we understand mitoch lavat hashabeyahev, and we have an umdana that allows us to be kafel the Tanai, because if he said that this get is only a get if and when you do X, then we understand that if you don't do X, he doesn't want to get. Or alternatively, it might be a chisar das. But that would operate midin umdana, not midin Tanai. In any event, we see from this Gemara that there's machlokas between Rabbi Meir and Chacham about whether or not we require a Tanai kafel. And this reflects the shita of Rabbi Chanina ben Gamliel in Kedusha Daf Samach Aleph. So the Rashba asks the following kasha. He says, according to Rabbi Meir, in this case, there's no Tanai kafel. And yet, the implication is that if it would be a Tanai kafel, then it would be a valid Tanai, and the get would depend upon Kiyama Tanai. So the Rashba asks the following question. But here's a case of Maisa Kodem L'Tanai. And one of the various rules, the 4 Mishpatei HaTanon that we derive from Bnei Ruvain, is that it's got to be Tanai Kodem L'Maisa. So that's the Rashba's business. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel Omer, Ein lecha Tanai b'ksuvim she'eino kafel. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel is l'chora attacking the shita of Rabbi Meir. Why? Because we have a principle called Shnei Ksuva Boim Kechanei Melamdin. And we find that throughout the Torah, whenever there's a Tanai, the Tanai is kafel. For example, in the 5th chapter of Bamidbar, with regard to Sota and Parshas Noso, the Torah says, "V'shpia osa kohen v'yamar la isha im lo shachav isha osach hinoki mimei hamorim ha'ela." And then it says in the next pasuk, "V'at kisatis tachas ishech v'chinit meis," etc., etc. So you see that the Torah went in both directions with a Tanai kafel. So too, we see it in Tanakh, in Yeshayahu Perek Aleph. It says, "Im tovu shmatem tuv ha'aretz tochelu, v'im taba'enu marisem, then cherev te'ukolu." So once again, we see over and over again that the Torah repeats a Tanai kafel, If the Torah wanted to teach me Tanai Kofel as a prerequisite for all Tanaim, then it would have been sufficient to teach me once. So that's what the Gemara says here now. And that's what we explained before. This is what Rabbi Shimon Gamliel argued against Rabbi Meir. The Torah consistently over and over again sets up a Tanai Kofel, like we saw in the cases of Sota and the shvur that the Sota has to take, or in the case of the castigation and the warning of Yeshayahu and Navi. And there are other examples. And therefore, so when the Torah repeats itself, it means that these are the exceptions to the rule rather than the rule. And the rule is just the opposite. And therefore, we come to the conclusion, says Reb Shimon Gamliel, that we don't require Tanai Kofel. But Ika Diabri, we have another version of Reb Shimon Gamliel, or Rabbanan Karmelavu. The Rabbanan who dropped the requirement of Tanai Kofel. Reb Shimon Gamliel argues, Hochi Karmela, Ein Lecha Tanai Baksuvim She'eno Kofel V'Gamrina Minayu. That Adara, because the Torah repeats itself time after time after time, and always has the Tanai written and formulated as a Tanai Kofel, it means that there's no din of Tanai without a Tanai Kofel. And that's against the sheet of the Chachamim. Yesh Lahavan, he writes, Ketzad Nitan Lomar Shenichval HaTanai B'Ksuvim. He says the Torah repeats itself over and over again, and now you're going to tell me that's to teach us that you need a Tanai Kofel. Well, what about the principle of Shnei Ksuva Bon Kecharei Melamdin? And the answer is, based on a Gemara in Kiddush and Daf Samach Aleph and Beis, there's a tzrichusa in every single case. And when there's a separate tzrichusa in every single case, then we don't apply the principle of Shnei Ksuvim, because Shnei Ksuvim is built on the fact that the Torah did not have any need or justification to repeat itself. But if there's a tzrichusa, then the Torah had to repeat itself. He writes here, how could we derive, according to the first version of Reb Shimon Gamliel, that you don't require a Tanai Kofel based on Shnei Ksuvim Bon Kecharei Melamdim? Hello, im alochi shetzarich Tanai Kofel, hakach tzarich lifol sa Tanai b'chol pa. Maybe the reason why the Tanakh repeats Tanai Kofel is because otherwise the Tanai won't be valid. Says the Chasam Sofer, the Torah didn't have to repeat the Tanai over and over again in all these cases. We would have understood by ourselves that there was a Tanai Kofel, because otherwise the Tanai would not be valid. Uraminu, the Gemara asks the following kasha. And we're going to quote a case where a man says to his wife, Hareza Gittin. This brisa says that if a man makes the following Tanai, Almanas shetsham abash teishanim, Almanas shetanikias benish teishanim, Mesa avo Mesa ben. Here, the impossibility of fulfilling the Tanai is not a result of anything that she did, simply the father died, or the son died. Is Eino get Divrei Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir says it doesn't matter whether or not she's at fault in Kiyum Tanai, or the Kiyum Tanai is a result of natural circumstances. In both cases, the Tanai is binding. The get depends upon the Kiyum Tanai. And if there was no Kiyum Tanai, then the get is bottled because the Tanai was not fulfilled. But keep in mind that here's a case where there's no Tanai Kofel. And yet Rabbi Meir validates the Tanai and invalidates the get because there was no Kiyum Tanai. What about the requirement of Tanai Kofel? The get is chal, and it's valid, even if there was no Kiyum Tanai. Why is that? She's not the cause of the Kiyum Tanai. She's ready, eager, and waiting to fulfill the Tanai. And therefore, that's not considered a bittul Tanai. Bittul Tanai means that she actively was mevatel the Tanai. Here, on the contrary, she's ready and willing to be Makayim the Tanai. Now, in Tanai Kofel here, we have the opposite of what we had before. Kasha de Rab Meir, Kasha de Rabbanan, de Rabbanan. In the original brisa that we started with above, Rabbi Meir holds that the Tanai if it's not kofel, it's not a Tanai. Here in this brisa, he is validating the Tanai despite the fact that it's not kofel. And so too we have a stira in the Chachamim, because above we say that according to Chachamim, if there was no kiyum Tanai, there's no get, because there was a bittul hatanai. And here we're saying no, that she has a right to say that I was not the cause of the bittul hatanai. The misa ta'av or the ben was the natural cause. And therefore, even if the tanai was not makuyim, then it'll let the get is kosher. But what we're going to see later on, and I'm just anticipating what's coming around the bend in just a minute, is that in the original brisa, the Chacham were talking about a case where she was not Makayim the Tanai. She was the Goremes for the Bittul Tanai. And that's what the Gemara is going to answer. The Rabbi Meir lo kasha, hasa, but lo kafli Tanai, hacha, but a kafli Tanai. In the original brisa, Rabbi Meir validates the get. And the reason why the Tanai is invalid is because lo kafli Tanai. She was not kofli Tanai. He was not kofli. But here, the second brisa, but a kafli Tanai, he was kofli Tanai, and therefore the Tanai is valid, and she didn't fulfill the Tanai. Rabbana lo kasha. Man chacham dahacha. Who are the chacham of this brisa from Shimon Gamliel? The Omar, he was of the opinion in the Mishnah back on Daf Ayin Hayam and Beis that call it kovish eina heimena harei get. So there's a machlokes between the Chachamim and Reb Shimon Gamliel on the following point. What happens if the Tanai was not Makuyim, but to no fault of her own? According to Reb Shimon Gamliel, if it was no fault of her own, she's ready and eager to fulfill the Tanai, then the get will be Chal, and we don't consider it as Bittul Tanai. However, the Brisa here, right, so this second Brisa reflects the Shita of Shimon Gamliel. However, the above quoted Brisa, which is Mavatel the get, that's because the Tanai sets up a condition in the get, regardless of whether or not she was the cause of the Ikiyum HaTanai. Tanarabban went to the Brayis Amalei, Bifnei Shnayim HaRezeh Gitei Chabnashit Tamsis Avash Teishanim. But says Rashi, he did not give the get in front of these two Eidim. And then Chazar v'Omer Lo Bifnei Shnayim, when he's ready to give the get, he says to two Eidim, so what does this man want? Does he want a Tanai of Tishamshi? Or does he want a Tanai of Masayim Zuz? Lo bitel divrei achronis harishon, he gave her two choices. He wasn't replacing the original Tanai, he was adding another possible Tanai. And she now has to decide which Tanai she wants to fulfill. Rotzav Mashamshito. If she wants to fulfill the original Tanai, that's fine. Rotzav, she decides no. Instead of being Meshamish the father, no senes lo Masayim Zuz, she wants to pay up the Masayim Zuz. That itself is a Kiyama Tanai. So we see here from this brisa that a man could give a woman in a Tanai two options. Again, because there were two different options. So what will it be? Is it 200 zuz or is it 300 zuz? Is bito divrei achronis harishon? Here we apply the principle that since in the presence of the two Eidim that she gave the get, she heard a Tanai and he repeated Tanai, but here he jacked it up to sholosh meos. Therefore, she has to pay sholosh meos. Now the Brisa goes on and says something else. What about Eidim? You have two sets of Eidim here. Could one Eid serve on both sets of Eidim? Says the Brisa, absolutely not. Each Eid is testifying on a different Maisa and a different Tanai. And we saw in the last case, again, we're now going on Ahad, the Sefer, right? The Gemara is going to vacillate about this. But according to this first possibility, we're going to say that in the Sefer, where the second Tanai is absolutely contradictory to the first Tanai, and therefore the second Tanai replaces the first Tanai, the aide who testifies on the first Tanai cannot be part of the Kad Eidus on the second Tanai. because there's no way of reconciling the two sets of edus. Gemara says, "Hey, ilay maseifa, hare botel." If it's the seifa, in the case where he adds 300 zuz, jacks it up by 100 zuz, and therefore the Tanai Rishon is botel, so certainly the aid who testifies on the first Tanai cannot be an aid on the second Tanai, because the testimony that he gave on the first Tanai is botel mevutal. Ella, where was there a havamina to say that maybe we can be mitzaref an aid from the first Tanai to the second? That's our ratio in the case where the first aid is testifying on Tisham Shias Abel. The second aid is testifying on Almanas Shetitni L'Masayim Zuz, and we integrated both into one gigantic Tanai, giving her two options. So Gemara says Pshita. I certainly understand that he can't testify. Why? Because each Tanai is a different Tanai. In the first case, you could have said, well, the Tanai of the second Tanai is built and extends the first Tanai. From Masayim Zuz, we jacked it up to 300 Zuz, but here we're going from Zuz to Shamshi Sabbath to Zuz. Where it says, there is a common link between these two Eidim. They're both testifying that the get depends upon a Kiyum Tanai. What exactly is the Kiyum Tanai? Those are the specifics. And we're going to say in the ratio that there are two possible options for the Kiyum Tanai, but the get is certainly dependent upon the Kiyum Tanai. Mashmalan, no. Since they're testifying on two different Tanoim, we cannot be mitzaref the two Eidim. And this leads us to the Mishnah on the bottom of Daf Ayin Vav. And this is a hemshech of Tanai Beget. Hareze gitechem lo basi mikad ve'at shloshim yom. If I don't show up in the next 30 days, the get should be a get. He said to her, look, right now I'm on a journey from Yehuda to Golil. And he wants to tell her, look, I'm going to remain in Golil when I arrive in Golil for a period of 30 days or more. And you won't see me back here in Yehuda. So since I'm in Golil for 30 days and I'm outside of Yehuda, the get will be chal. However, what happens if he leaves one point of Yehuda, arrives in Golil by crossing the border from Yehuda to Golil, and instead of remaining in Golil for 30 days, he goes back to Yehuda? That's called Higia Lantifras V'chaza. So he crossed the border, the boundary between Yehuda and Golil. Now he's in Golil. And instead of remaining in Golil for 30 days to fulfill the Tanai, he immediately turns around and goes back to Yehuda. The get is but. Why? Because the get is being given al smach the halicha rishona. You might say, well, wait a minute. Okay, he crossed the boundary into Golil, he went on Tifras, and now when he goes back into Yehuda, give him an option to go back from Yehuda into Golil. And maybe this time he'll get it right. And he'll stay in Golil for 30 days. No, we don't say that. The Tanai was all based on what we call the Halicha Rishona. And the Halicha Rishona, he went to Golil by reaching Antifras, and then he turned back to Yehuda rather than remain in Golil for 30 days. Now, Hareze Gitach, so too, if he says to a woman, this is your get him lo basi mikan vat shloshim yom v'yaholuch mikol Yehuda, this is the opposite direction. He's now in Golil, and he's on his way to Yehuda. He gil kfar osnai. He crossed the boundary from Golil into Yehuda. He penetrated into Yehuda, and he reached that place in Yehuda, which is on the boundary with Golil, which is called kfar asunai, and v'chazar. And instead of remaining in Yehuda for 30 days to fulfill the Tanai, he immediately turns his back and he goes back to Golil. Is the Hakol Holech Achar Halicha Rishona, and we don't give it a second option for Halicha Shnia, and therefore, since he didn't remain for 30 days in Yehuda, but rather he reached Yehuda and went back after he hit Kfar Asanoi, the get is but, the Tanai is but. Another case. A man is on his way from Eretz Yisrael to Medina Sayyam. And he makes a Tanai, this get is yours if I remain in Medina Sayyam for 30 days. He Giel Akko. And now we assume that Akko is in Chutz La'aretz, meaning it's part of Medina Sayyam. All this is according to the Havmin of the Gemara. The Gemara is going to prove later on that Akko is actually in Eretz Yisrael. But right now we're interpreting the Mishnah according to the Havmin of the Gemara that Akko is in Chutz La'aretz. Chazar, instead of remaining in Akko or beyond in Chutz La'aretz for 30 days to fulfill the Tanai, Chazar, he immediately goes back to Eretz Yisrael, Batel Tanai, and the get is Nachal. Harezeg Hitei Kol Zman She'evar Keneged Panayich Shloshim Yom. If I'm going to pass your Keneged Panim, and I will not remain there for 30 days, the get will be Chal. And therefore, Yeholechu Ba, hold it on a Siachin Ima, Harezeg Get. The Gemara is going to explain that Keneged Panayich means Yichud or maybe Bia, and therefore, since he didn't have Yichud, then there was a Kiyama Tanai, and the get is Chal. Okay, let's go back to the Mishnah, and we're going to pick up the case of a person who's going from Yehuda to Golun. No, I'm sorry. In the case where he's going from Golil to Yehuda, I just want to get it again. I should really write this on the board. Antifras is Golil. Oh, so he's going from Yehuda to Golil, and he reaches Antifras and turns back. L'meimer d'Antifras beGolil. Right, he was going from Yehuda to Golil, and he crossed the border into Golil when he hit Antifras. Uramini, I have a brisa that says the exact opposite. The man make a Tanai and a get that it should be Chal if he doesn't come back in 30 days. He was on his way from Yehuda to Golil, or the opposite. Antifras be Yehuda. Antifras is not, as we saw in our Mishnah, in Golil, but rather it's in Yehuda. Ukfar Sunai is not in Yehuda as we saw in our Mishnah, but rather it's in Golil. So these are two towns or villages that are almost contiguous. They're next to each other, right next to each other. Antifras is on the border of Eretz Yehuda, but it's still within Yehuda. And Kfar Asunai is at the beginning of the Golil, and it's in Golil. When he was going from Yehuda to Golil, and he reaches Antifras, and he goes back, that's not considered Bitul Tanai. Why? Because Antifras is still in Yehuda, exact opposite of our Mishnah. And his Tanai was if he reaches Golil, and he remains in Golil for 30 days, but he never reached Golil. He was still within the bounds of Yehuda, because Antifras, according to this price, is in Yehuda. Now we go the opposite way. Let's say he was in Golil, he was going towards Yehuda, and he reaches Kfar Asunai, which this price maintains is in Golil, so he never crossed over to Yehuda, is then he was a Mevatel Tzrai, and the get could be Chal. Bein Tayim. What if he arrives at a place which is between Antifras and Kfar Asunai, in a very thin sliver of land? Is there Matilin or Solachumra? Now we have to be machmer. We don't know if he crossed the border or he didn't cross the border in both directions, because he immediately went back home. So on the one hand, we have to assume that he already crossed the border. That he didn't cross the border yet, and therefore there's no Bitul Tanai, and she's Megureshes, and therefore she can never marry a Kohen. But on the other hand, we have to go l'chumra and assume that she crossed the border, that he crossed the border, and the get is batel, and therefore she can't marry anyone else until she gets a second get. V'ena Megureshes. And now we turn to Daf Ayin Vav Amud Beis.